and we can't decide what is true and what's not true. But then I see young people sort of taking on this work and advocacy and really sort of stepping into different forms of identity and values than their parents did. And I find that very encouraging and comforting, and it gives me a lot of hope for the future. Yeah.
This is a podcast called Walk, Talk, Listen. An attempt to connect people and make this world a bit better by sharing opinions and experiences based on the belief that everyone's perspective is true, albeit partial. My name is Maurice Blom, and I would like to welcome you to yet another episode of Walk, Talk, Listen. Good day, everybody. This is another episode of the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen, and I'm really excited today because I have two guests, and later it will become obvious why I asked them to be here today. But I will ask them to introduce themselves. Shaurya, please go ahead.
Hey everyone, I'm Shaurya, one of the co-founders of Fleet, and really excited to be here. Thanks, Maurice, for having us on as well. Just a little bit about my background and myself. I've been in this realm of sustainability, transportation, and tech for almost a decade now, dating back to my time in college at Stanford. Really, dug deep into this realm, both from a startup entrepreneurial perspective, and also got involved in a lot of research at the School of Energy at Stanford, which is now part of the new kind of sustainability school. But been pretty aggressively in this. My original background and foundation is originally from computer science. That's my core trait. But I've always been leveraging these tools and resources in our arsenal and technology to kind of attack problems in transportation, energy, sustainability, and access. And prior to working on Fleet per se, I was working with another European operator, sort of a train bus operator out of Europe. Helping them kind of expand to the US, their operations there, and really kind of get a nice lay of the land of how mobility and transportation and urban kind of concepts have evolved in Europe, to see how we can really take some of those ideas and leapfrog a lot of the progress that we're making in the US as well. And I'm very excited to have Sydney as well working with me on this, and I'll let her sort of introduce a little bit about herself as well.
Great.
Thanks, Shaurya. Hi, everybody. I'm Sydney. I'm the other co-founder of Fleet. As you heard, Shaurya is kind of the tech and computer science side of things. I am an urban planner, a transportation planner by training. I started out my life in urban planning at Harvard and also did a lot of work at MIT in the urban mobility lab there, focusing on issues at the intersection of urban design, human-centered design, and walkable, sustainable cities. I came to urban planning in sort of a non-traditional route, come from the NGO world. I used to work in international development in the Middle East and North Africa region. I was working, running a Ford Foundation funded grant in Cairo, Egypt, where we did research and projects on urban issues. Mostly around critical pieces of infrastructure like energy, water supply, and roads and transportation in Cairo, Egypt. And so that's sort of how I got into urban planning. And that is just sort of how my story began and how I ended up at Fleet.
So tell the listeners a bit, how did you connect and did you have that plan about the present company from day one, or how did that tell us a bit about how that went?
Yeah, absolutely. I think even at a high level, you could really quickly tell both Sydney, myself, and actually most of the folks that we've brought together to work on Fleet come with very different, sort of diverse rich backgrounds. We all got great sort of foundation and education pieces covered from the US and then built sort of our ground there. But we've all sort of gone out, worked in these, kind of related, augmented the whole sphere of the space in general. And that's been a big part of how we're pulling folks together to really build, beyond just the product or technology that we kind of help people kind of with deploy and with customers. A bigger part of what we've also done is really gather this really interesting kind of set of people who are all sort of aligned and very passionate about mobility and transportation and creating an impact of sustainability while leveraging tech and coming from all parts of the world, right? The tech part versus urban mobility versus planners, designers, whatever it may be. And that's a big part of what we're also bringing together. For us, it really did start off, we've spent a lot of time in different parts of this realm around the table. Like I myself is, running we did few kind of direct to consumer products. We ran sort of an Uber pool, Lyft line-esque service, kind of carpooling on demand transit in the Bay Area before, Uber pool and Lyft line even launched and grew that out. We spent a lot of time doing sort of consumer products, ended up even kind of on the operator side of the table with this, European company that I previously mentioned. We grew operations, really understood how, trains, buses, what the business models behind this is, how to scale, and then even understanding that the bottlenecks of that in the US. And that's really, when we're working on that project per se, especially in the Bay Area, that's really what brought us to the table with the folks working on commuting per se. And that's really the big lens of what we're taking. There's a huge conversation in mobility around the consumer side, the autonomous, connected, electric, shared, the ACEs of transportation, which we're all very excited about. But there's very little of that conversation happening on the enterprise side of things, of mass people movement, mass transit, mass commuting. And that's really what we're really focused on and then trying to, drive the needle towards. And so that's how we started. We actually got, when we were looking into big transit systems, especially in the Bay Area, big transportation systems, a lot of the regional employers play a really big role in that because they're essentially moving cities worth of people on a day-to-day basis, right? And they have a very interesting incentive to try to make that more seamless, whether it's from a mental well-being perspective, reduce congestion, or now so more from a sustainability and ESG mandate as well. And that's really where we started talking to these folks, more from a mass transit, even from some of the research I did at Stanford. We were connected to the big companies over at Google, Facebook, Apple, that are moving tens and thousands of employees, not just in the Bay Area, really, 20, 30 different locations globally. And that's really how we started Fleet, where, we came around to understanding what are the key challenges that people are facing in the commuting world, whether it's, larger enterprises that are already running very massive systems, but also, the rest of the folks that, aren't sitting in these shuttle buses provided by the employer that may or may not be electric, but even the rest of the folks, that are 250,000, daily drivers just in the Bay Area on the freeways that are going to smaller companies, working in other offices that aren't, tech and don't have the kind of benefits and resources to be able to impact their employees' commutes to that level. And it's kind of, the way we sort of got to where we're getting to, even from where Sydney got in and how we sort of realized, I think it was a big part of the equation was the team and the folks that we're pulling together to solve this problem. Right. So we know we have a very strong, the technology is a big driver, is a big enabler in this realm. And we, are very cognizant of leveraging tech and innovation that's happening in and around the world to bring it into the space. But there's a lot of stuff that is very inherent to, urban planning, urban mobility, to this demand sort of choice modeling of how people are making decisions, especially in a place that's become relatively new, right? Mobility and transportation has rapidly changed in the last 5, 7, 10 years. Like I remember when Uber first came out and it started making it, interesting idea of going after taxi companies and making that whole experience interesting. And now, we don't feel like it's strange to get into someone else's car prior to, before they actually launch. So, we're seeing transportation play a really big role and it's evolving super rapidly. And we actually think that it's probably going to be sort of the internet of our generation, right? Where folks are like my kids, they don't have any yet, but my kids won't have driving licenses or think about owning a car in the same way that even we do compared to even what our parents do. Right. So I think that's a really big part of it. And we really wanted to get as much of the voices, as much of the, pieces on the table. And that's really when I met Sydney, who comes from a very interesting background herself, having, being exposed to not just the world, but also, different transportation systems around the world. Even myself have grown up all over the place. Like I spent the most amount of time I spent in one place has been about 8 years in California. And, prior to that, it was just kind of globe trotting per se with the family and really kind of understanding different systems. And a big part of, what we were really excited about getting more folks, what Sydney really shored up as well for us to be able to most effectively tackle this problem as a business was this concept of, bringing in this research from urban planning, bringing in this deeper understanding of how these new modes, these scooters, these electric, the whole spectrum of options that we have now more than ever before, how do they play a role in our lives, and how can we help understand that better, convey that better to both the commuters, the riders, but also all the other stakeholders involved, whether it's employers or government and sort of everybody around the sphere too.
Hey, and I think it's really fascinating and an important topic. I mean, about what you said in terms of, that your kids might not have the driving license, or that will be very different. It's crazy idea, but at the same time, yes, it's something that you see around you already. But I would like to go back to, how you guys started and how you found each other, because I think for a lot of entrepreneurs out there, what is often happening is that your people in your own field, but how do you, find people in other fields, and then how do you know that it will click? Because you start a company, right? It's talk us a little bit through that, how that went.
So Shaurya had sort of a previous iteration of Fleet, the kind of Fleet version 1, which looked very different than it does today. And so they had sort of built out the first version of this product, and they were explicitly looking for somebody with a transportation planning background to bring in all of the sort of principles behind urban planning and transportation planning specifically, and to find ways to integrate that into the product itself. So I came across Fleet. I had always been predisposed to working in tech because I come from the NGO world and also from the public sector a little bit. And I knew that one of my biggest frustrations with urban planning as a discipline was the pace at which things go. And I've always wanted to sort of work in a field that is much quicker, much more demand responsive, where we're not afraid to innovate and do things quickly. And so I was looking at tech solutions, people who were bringing urban planning into tech in interesting ways. And I came across Fleet. And so I got in touch, and Shaurya and I just started having conversations, and we were having all of these really sort of great ideas passed back and forth about how we could bring, for example, some of the behavioral economics principles of transportation planning into our product, and how that would strengthen the product from, a user standpoint. And how we might create something that really set itself apart from these older legacy solutions that were just really not solving the problem or meeting the existing demand for better commuting experiences. And so that's how we got together. We just kind of randomly, I found him and we started having conversations, and we decided to work together.
Right. Cool. Where do you think your company is now? I mean, should it have been further down the road, or are you, are you comfortable with where you are? And then have a follow-up question on that as well. So
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, obviously everybody wants to be further than they are. I think if you're not, then we're in the wrong, field of life. But outside of that, I think, there are a lot of things that, we've also been kind of exposed to and are catching us in cycles, I would say, specifically in this realm of transportation and commuting, the space that we're in. The pandemic, we've been around pre-pandemic as well. And that was sort of a the iteration 1.5 that we had. And that was really exciting. It was a really good time as well in general, as things were becoming more and more kind of apparent and clearer for us as a business, as the impact that we can create. The pandemic obviously came in as a really interesting spin.
Did that help you, or did that give you a setback? Or
it was interesting. No, I mean, it definitely forced us back to the drawing board in a big aspect, right? So I think for most people, right, any plans that you had made for 2020, 2021, were kind of out the window, and you really had to re-strategize and think more about what it really is. What's the, brass tacks of what we're doing, and how does it apply? What parts of this are still useful in this world that became our new normal? And then how do we anticipate what this is going to look like? And also making plans which are very unknown timelines, right? We, not only the folks that we were working with on the employee side, but also, we ourselves didn't know, was the pandemic, is it a 3-month thing? Is it a 6-month thing? Is it a 2-year, 3-year thing? Right? Looking back at it now, nobody really could have predicted what's going to happen. But it was interesting for us, for sure. I think, the transportation space in general was very shaken. Commuting was obviously, it's an understatement to say that it was hit hard. Everything almost went on pause initially. But I think overall, it was a very unique time for us. Like, we had already been in commuting for a little while in mass transportation. We were already talking to companies prior to that. And the silver lining almost worked out in the favor of us, where, we were initially convincing employers to understand more, learn more about your own employees' commutes, understand what's the impact, the carbon impact that they're having as an employer, who at the end of the day is still responsible for that impact that's happening because of their employees, but also, how much time and productivity is being lost, what's the cost, like all of these things that employers just don't have a very clear grasp of. And then, doing that education part. So we were convincing people, here is what it looks like, and this is why you should worry about your employees' commutes. And the pandemic kind of flipped the conversation. We were really, a lot of people started coming to us to then ask about, almost because they're being forced to rethink their commuting, right? When everything went on pause, for the non-essential workers, everyone was working from home. And for those folks, then employers and HR started working on what this new normal would look like. Let's set up sanitization stations. Let's create social distancing, hybrid schedules. But nobody really had much of a solution for this door-to-desk approach of, I've set up my office, I've got all the safety check boxes done, but commuting or transportation is still unchecked. How do I get them to the office? How do I do that with the least amount of liability or exposure? People were afraid to take public transit. Should if I want to reopen my offices, should I get everybody a bike to come to the office, or Uber everybody to work? What does it look like, and what's the best I can do as an employer to kind of bridge that gap? And that's how we had a lot of folks coming back to us with, I remember you guys were talking about commuting before. Now I'm forced to look into it. It's one of my check boxes, for my return to work piece. What can we do? What does it look like? What are other people doing? It became a really interesting time for us, to be there. But there was still this undertone of uncertainty that stayed with us throughout that time, right? It was very exciting. We got a lot of interest. We had a lot of, we were obviously really pumped because we've been here for a while. We were already championing commuting, and now we're, part of most of the conversations. And there weren't that many folks talking about it, alongside us. So it was a nice place to be, but it was still very uncertain. People kept sliding their timelines. When am I returning to work? When do I need my employees back? Oh, there's a new wave. Let's hold off. We were dealing with that. And that really did force us a little bit back as well. So we, had these conversations, but the other nice piece that came out of the pandemic situation for us was this new kind of focus, or this energy that we started putting in towards essential workers, which I think really worked out well. One of the, larger customers and folks that we were working with, sort of the city of San Francisco, government agency, and they have 6,000 essential workers that have been commuting even throughout the pandemic, even now, and they became an interesting demographic for us, especially since a big part of our own sort of mission and vision was to increase access to these commuting programs and commuting and sustainable commuting options that larger companies are throwing money at and able to set up for their employees, but smaller companies really aren't, and smaller companies just mean smaller budget folks as well, including essential worker organizations like government agencies. So we really did start to rethink, even from a product, business, perspective, value proposition, what are the core pieces that even essential worker organizations or essential workers could benefit from. for their day-to-day commutes, whether it's university workers, facilities, hospital workers, or bus and train drivers as well, who need to be there and make sure the city infrastructure is in place. Predominantly in the US at the moment, we do have, we support Canada, for example, North America. It is pretty easy for us to turn things on and off. So we are in conversation with a bunch of folks, especially in the sustainability realm, which has become more exciting even for us as from a transportation system. People want to know ESG reporting. They need to know what their employees' commutes look like. How can I run? Is there a fun, easy way for me to incentivize my employees and build sustainable sort of choices into their day-to-day commutes, into their lifestyle as a culture, less so as a checkbox, which I think is really exciting of a trend that we started to see in sustainability. We're talking to a few sustainability folks outside of, in Europe and Asia, kind of expanding the broadly. But right now we've been mainly focused in the US. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Sydney, you mentioning that you come from the NGO world, right? And that you moved because of the speed. Is this a company giving you the speed and the results that you are aiming for?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's every day is we do so many things, and we have a continuous feedback loop. So we're constantly looking at the way that folks are actually using our product, and we're able to pull pieces of data in really interesting ways to kind of see what the user experience is like. And then we can immediately turn around and change the product. And we're always iterating and making changes that will either respond to the challenges facing a particular employer, or how people are interacting with the app, how it's serving their daily life. And we've got an amazing team of engineers, and they're just sort of so great at figuring out technical solutions I will come to them with this like bigger problem that's kind of abstract and urban planning-y, and we can have these really great conversations where we talk about how do we actually implement a tech solution? How do we translate this idea that Sydney had into an actual part of the product? And how can we change the way that a person is using our product every day? And it's just so great to be able to see these changes happening in real time, and to be able to see how people are using the product differently. And one of the things that sets us apart is that we don't have to operate at the enterprise level. So many commuter programs are only for these really big organizations and enterprises that have clunky in-house transportation planning teams. And they take on these, year-long, multi-month consulting engagements to do these really long and drawn-out commute analyses. And then they sort of follow this formulaic pattern to figure out exactly, what kind of shuttle program can I run, or how can I subsidize parking? And we've figured out a way to make this all happen so much more quickly, so the feedback loop is immediate. And that makes it so much more accessible for smaller companies who don't have massive budgets to run their own transportation planning teams. And so we're able to, bring somebody on board within a matter of hours, and we can actually get programs up and running immediately. And you're really able to sort of see the difference of employees being able to use our programs and change their commuting patterns in real time.
And do you guys have NGO as your clients? And then that's one question. And the second question is, I have the feeling that a lot of NGOs are hesitant to look into this. And so what will you tell them, in terms of convincing them that they should make this part of what they do as well? The two questions.
Well, we don't currently have any NGO clients. We have had we have some NGOs in the pipeline, some bigger foundations and sort of folks who are in effect, larger scale employers. We do have public sector clients. We're pretty, in terms of the kind of proposal process that it often takes to get into a public sector engagement, that can be theoretically a bit of a barrier, though it hasn't been in the past for us. But there really aren't that many barriers for us to work with different types of organizations. It's just about how they sort of approach their own employees and, what their specific workforce's needs are for getting to and from work and where they're located too. A lot of NGOs who are in metropolitan areas, it makes a lot more sense to use a product like Fleet than compared to somebody else elsewhere.
Yeah. And I think, as you mentioned as well, in terms of convincing folks, we've seen folks kind of fall into a couple of different buckets when we do have the conversation with them. The most sort of prominent and sort of ubiquitous bucket is really sort of cost, right? Everybody cares about cost, especially even in today's economy. The cost savings are a much more amplified value add as well. But people don't really, if you talk to facilities folks, if you talk to real estate folks, if you talk to operations, there's a very, very real cost associated with commuting, right? Not just to the actual employee that's commuting, but there's a cost to the employer, whether it's, parking spaces that they've made available, part of the office lease, whether it's part of a, transit program, some matching. And these are more tangible, direct monetary costs. There's also a couple of other, costs that we know, whether it's, productivity, well-being, retention costs. Even from a recruiting perspective, HR, they know that, 1 in 4 people that leaves because of a bad commute. They cite that in their exit survey. So, even HR and folks at small companies have known that, frankly, commuting sucks for everybody, and there's very little that they've been able to do about it. They've maybe Googled some stuff before, looked into some options. Maybe some employees have told them, hey, there's a program I heard about, or there's this carpooling or van pooling thing near my city where I live. So they've maybe started looking into it. And we've really seen kind of 500, employee onward, kind of when companies go past that point, it really becomes someone's responsibility to look into it, whether it's from a recruiting, retention perspective or a cost savings perspective. And that's really what starts to drive the equation, where if someone's looked into it, then maybe they'll start a commute stipend. You've seen a lot of companies do this blanket sort of $100 per month or $50 a month of commuting credit. And it's even they themselves call it a feel-good spend, right? They feel good that they're spending and they're potentially doing something, but at the end of the day, the employees are, just taking that, maybe putting it in their back pocket, and then still sort of driving or doing whatever they were doing habitually, and still feeling like it's locked, still feeling the miserable aspects of the commute, and it's still sort of the first topic of conversation when you get into the office, right? So that's still the dynamic that we've seen across the board, and I think the pandemic almost accelerated that part of the conversation, where now, folks are now comfortable being at home. They've seen what, no commuting looks like, where I've got that time back. I've got, less stress because I'm not stuck behind a wheel, or, I've got all these other savings, even from gas and parking and so on. So people have now been exposed to what that world will look like. And then now to ask them to turn that on again, like, hey, we want to force you to come back. Most employers still do want employees to come back, at least in some capacity. And, in that realm, getting employees, convincing them again to come back, without, risking a big hit to your morale, without risking a big hit to productivity or employee churn, is a really big concern for employers right now. And that's somewhere where we are able to really come in from a cost savings perspective. Either if they have programs that they're running, we're able to save them a lot of money on those programs. Very, very simply, it's a very kind of clear equation. But also, if they're looking to set up programs, we help them very quickly set up programs at 1/10 the cost of what they would have had to do it themselves, at the same size of the larger company. So cost savings has been a big driver, but then a couple of the other areas, that we touched on as well. So, recruiting and retention, it's a very tough labor market in a lot of industries. Tech is a kind of prime suspect for that. But outside of tech as well, it's hard to keep employees stuck where they are. And commuting transportation is a backbone of, where you choose to live, where you work. It plays in your mind almost every single day you get in your car or you take the train to work. A part of you is thinking about it. How do I feel about this? And to be there for the employees and in that aspect, from a recruiting, retention, employee well-being, making sure that they're coming in well rested and not, kind of draining them over time because of long, kind of strenuous commutes. And then sustainability is another really interesting realm. That also, I think, came out of the pandemic, to be honest. We've always had sustainability and sort of the carbon footprint as one of the metrics of our platform, where we help teams and employers care about and understand and better track. But really only after the pandemic, when people saw the streets were empty, the air was cleaner, the Venice canals in Italy were finally, visible and very picturesque, and things like that were a lot more tangible for people to see, even in like a 3-month reset almost. Nature kind of, people are saying the cities are healing, nature is healing, it's kind of getting its chance to come out. And the most optimal choice of mobility was like open air, biking or scooters and things like that. And a lot of people have picked that up. So we want to make sure that that stays in terms of habits and help them kind of encourage that. But I think that new sort of lens into sustainability, into the environment, we hope that it's not another fad. I think that's something that, we always continue to worry about. We've seen it come and go in waves, obviously, like, hey, sustainability, climate change has been a problem for a long time. But yeah, I think, now we're starting to see a little bit more action. I would say a lot more. I say a little bit more action where this is your space too. You're familiar with this inside out, but we're starting to see more sustainability officers, come into position and start to take charge of initiatives. We're seeing regulation starting to come around and kind of passing more climate related initiatives that are going to help folks be part of that mandate. But we're also seeing that from a transportation, realm with Scope 3 emissions. Employers are being forced now almost to be responsible for it. Earlier, it was more so, do you want to take up the responsibility, or is sustainability a big part of your culture? Like, as an employer, as an organization, do you care about sustainability? And then do you want to do something about it? But now it's almost like, you kind of have to do something about it. And then the degree to which you act depends more on, how big of a role, let's say, your ground transportation or employees' daily commuting plays in your organization's kind of full carbon footprint per se. But that's been really exciting for us to get a lot more conversations going on sort of the sustainability and energy reduction and fuel consumption end as well.
Sydney, you have anything to add before I take you guys into another area of discussion?
No, I think that Shaurya covered all of our bases there.
Okay, great. Hey, well, I think that this podcast is a spin-off of a 100-mile walk that I've been doing for 10 years now. And I'm actually, you're the first. I'm working on the 11th. I will do that from October 9 until 15, I think, in Seattle area. So you've started with the preparations for it. I said I would never do it again. I think it's time to hand over the baton. But we are my successors are not ready yet, so I will do it another year. But in 2020, I was not able to walk with others, because that happens as well. Even if they walk a mile with me, and then we talk about life and stuff. So it's, and I thought, okay, I can do it virtually, and that's why the podcast started. If I ask you, or if you would be asked to walk 100 miles in a week, so 15 to 20 miles per day, I do it to end hunger, to raise funds and awareness around ending hunger, poverty and injustice. If you would be asked to do that, to walk, what cause would you pick? I would like to start with you, Sydney.
I mean, for me, it's very clear. This is the thing that drives me every day, and the thing that we work on, which is, curbing greenhouse gas emissions, reducing congestion, and improving the quality of life in cities. We're all about more walkable, more sustainable cities. And I think that this feeds directly into global climate change, which is the biggest challenge facing humanity today. And for us, I mean, we're so passionate about our work that I would just as easily walk 100 miles and then work on this kind of thing day in, day out as part of our company. But we work right at the intersection of all of these challenges, and we're sort of driven every day by meeting that challenge with innovation and new solutions to create products that have, a meaningful impact and improvement on not only daily life at the individual level, but also at the community level and at the environmental and global level. And I think that what really sets us apart is that everyone on our team is driven by this imperative. And that's sort of what really brings us together and allows us to find meaning and motivation for our work every day.
Yeah, I would piggyback on that
Gotcha.
too. I think that's another, big part of what we're excited about the group that we've got together. I think everyone does have a shared, driver, a shared passion towards a specific cause. Like you said, I think, what you'd be most excited about, being walking 100 miles for in the week. I'd say, yeah, let's take everybody and walk them to their offices together. Let's walk for the commute itself. But yeah, I think at a grander scale, I think at a higher level, it's definitely more about, I think passionate about wanting to sort of create an impact, sort of create a sustainable, impact that lasts beyond just, something that you have and something that you see or something that you do. It's very much kind of a deeper impact. And I think, sustainability driving impact for change in this climate world where we understand, we're coming deeper from transportation. We know it's sort of like the single largest, GHG emitter as a single source, and then, ground transportation and commuting, which we sort of put in the background very quickly, right? We think there's all these apps and scooters, there's so much stuff happening. And when you're running an errand or doing stuff on weekends, like we'll hop on it more sort of a fun trial piece, but it's really not part of the systemic, Monday to Friday, big chunk of what happens in transportation. And that's really what we wanted to drive the conversation about. It's something that we know there are very clear opportunities to move the needle and drive impact and create sort of a sustained sort of dent there. And we wanted to be part of that conversation of where that ends up. And that's something that does continue to drive us, and something that we'd walk 100, 200, maybe 300 miles. Like we'll keep going. Why stop at 100? As long as you're not driving, we'll keep walking.
Right. Walking is so appropriate. Get out of your car.
Right. I think I found myself. So,
we'll take it on. Yeah. We'll take everybody to work.
When I walk, it's it really feels like a kind of a spiritual experience. You think about, why are we on this earth? And so even if I walk alone, I have these thoughts, and why am I doing this anyway? So when I walk with somebody else, we often talk about religion and spirituality, and then quickly, the youth becomes into the conversation. If conversations about, is this younger generation different than the older generation in terms of religion and spirituality? And some people say yes, others say no. Maybe they are looking differently at institutionalized religion, but they're very spiritual still, or it depends on the context, which country you work. What do you guys see, among youth in the communities that you work?
Yeah, I think it's a mix. I think that's an interesting point. I think everybody has their own bubbles and areas where we interact with, and that's kind of our friends of exposure. I think I am very fortunate that I have traveled a lot, and both my parents are a bit religious, and originally I come from India too, which is generally known to be a lot more, religion forward too. But I think even, myself and amongst, let's say, my immediate group of friends and folks that I interact with socially, I'd say some of the things that you touched on sound like I would echo that as well. I think people maybe are a bit less religious, but still, spiritual in some capacity. What that kind of entails or what form it takes for different people, it's different. I can definitely, it's hard to kind of pinpoint that. But I do think that there is a little bit of dichotomy between, let's say, our generation and the one prior, per se. I would say, things are kind of the same idea of like, hey, that's been tradition, and so we follow it, versus, let's say, my generation, folks in our generation are a bit more curious and maybe even rebellious to a nature of, why, they'll ask the questions, they'll try to formulate things. And then I think that does help, especially for us, especially for if we are looking, we've done things the same way for a long time. And that's really what's got us where we are. And that's, we follow tradition, whether it's religion or spirituality, certain causes, even environmental pieces, right? If we pull that back in, that's how we've gotten to where we are. So if we do need to make a change, if we do need to change the way we think about it, change the way we do things, we first need to change the way we think as well. And I think because we have a newer generation that may be a little bit more of a mix of questioning and curiosity and religions and spirituality kind of thoughts, it also creates a very nice sort of platform or hotbed or opportunity for us to kind of create those changes and try to embody things like, sustainability is not just like something we have to do, something we have to get done. It's really something that we want to, be internally more cognizant of, like, just our day-to-day decision.
Yeah.
Sydney, you seem to agree.
I do. I think that at least what I've observed among younger people is that things like religion and spirituality, which in older generations were sort of these hard and fast fixed identities that we inherited from our parents, are taking on much more sort of fluid identities and performances. And young people are connecting with each other in, many different ways that sort of transcend these spiritual or religious identities, and that are more around shared values and tolerance and shared experiences. And so many of those you see playing out in professional environments. I mean, people really care about the values of the organizations they work for. They want to work for companies that they feel are doing good in the world. And young folks are rightly so, very sort of upfront and forward about the importance of mental health on both an individual and a community level, and sort of healing from lots of, past divisions, and also bringing it back into the workplace context, which is, context that we exist in. They, want to work for employers who value them as people, and they're not willing to sort of sacrifice their own personal well-being and mental health for a job that doesn't value them. And that's where we see things like commuting coming into play. I'm sorry to always bring it back to commuting, but these are things that impact well-being on a daily level. And I think it's really empowering to see young people really looking at their lives in a more holistic way, and how these individual sort of little minute pieces of their day build up into what their life looks like and their own personal satisfaction with it. And also the kind of meaningful connections they're able to make inside and outside of work.
Thanks for that. I would like to kind of build on that, on the words you used around holistic and sustainability that you mentioned, Shaurya. I try to talk to my audience about the sustainable development goals that are out there. It's not perfect. 17 goals is a lot, but I think at least it gives us a framework. So I have two questions around that sustainability. And the first one is, what would you like the listeners to know about the 17 Sustainable Development Goals? That's one. And then the second question is, there is a group of people out there are saying, one of the reasons that we are not reaching those 17 goals is because we did not pay attention to the abilities, qualities, and skills that you need as an individual as well as a community to push that system, to make those changes in the systems and the processes. So they came up with the inner development goals. And I sent you a link beforehand to that, just in case. So my second question is, what do you think about the inner development goals? So because otherwise I put words into your mouth. So the two questions. One is the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, what you would like my audience to know about that? And two is, what do you think about the inner development goals?
Yeah. Shaurya, do you want to take this, or do you want me to? I have some thoughts.
Okay, go for it. Yeah, you started off. I'll jump in.
Sure. I think that, SDG 11 is all about more sustainable cities and communities. And within that goal specifically, 11.2 is about building safe, affordable, accessible, and sustainable transport systems. And I think that we really underestimate the amount that daily systemic commuting has an effect on greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, transportation is a huge driver of climate change. It's almost a third of total emissions, and cars and trucks are almost half of that. And it's the largest, the biggest, most quickly increasing contributor to greenhouse gas emissions as well. And even these sort of small decisions that we can make on a daily basis to change our habits, if we bring that up to the community level, to the city level, they can make meaningful change. And, it's so important to actually look at our own habits and how those impact goals like the SDGs, and how we can make, take meaningful steps towards achieving those things.
Yeah.
Thank
No,
you.
I completely concur. I think the other, interesting piece is also that there's, even outside of just these specific, SDGs and the different buckets that they've built, there's a lot of underlying overlap as well across the board, with everything that they're trying to do. Obviously, this is kind of like the whole, if you look at the circle of all the different categories, it's all supposed to form this ecosystem. And that is a big part of it, something that we also have a lot of conversations around, even pulling, abstracting on top of commuting, is a concept of, health and well-being, right? Traditionally, driving, which is the most popular, more than 70% of people are still driving alone in cars. It's still the worst mode of commute for both your health and mental well-being, right? Not just for the environmental impact and carbon offset, right? Biking around a green space, like this is something that we were doing research on too as well, of, can we even come up with a fitness or well-being score about how, what is the current, mental state of the commuting of your employees, and you take into account things like not just biking in open air, but you bike past a park, and that has a stimulating effect to you. Greener, environment have sort of impacts on health, well-documented impacts in science for how that helps you, and spending time in fresh air, and all that does tie in. And it's similarly, whether it's like the different buckets, right? There's societal sort of the SDGs, there's the economic, and then there's the environment aspect of things. But regardless, I think there is underlying aspects that kind of broaden and kind of go across the board for everybody. And the bigger piece, I think that was really interesting when you kind of shared the kind of pieces around the IDG, the internal development goals, as well as the inner development goals. I think that was really interesting too, because at the end of the day, and this is something that we're dealing with as well on a day-to-day basis, is that a lot of these systems, a lot of these goals and challenges and solutions that are going to come to address these are all, at the end of the day, driven and built by people. Right? We're the only ones that are doing that impact and creating the systems. Right? So being able to realize that, not to get to these bigger goals, whether it's a society-driven goal or an economy-driven goal or just sort of environmental goals, all of this has to be done by the people that are pushing and working towards it. And we really need to be more aligned internally to do that, outside of just, what drives us in the day-to-day. And that's why another big concept is kind of building sustainability into the business model of things, right? We know money is a big driver for growth, for success, for ambition. And if you can bake sustainability or environmental consciousness into business models that actually either affects the bottom line or increase the top line, then, we know that that's an interesting kind of innovative business model that will then have a much easier impact and affects people on a day-to-day basis. But I think the inner development goals are very interesting, to help us individually figure out which of these areas is most resonant to us, and which of these will have a more direct impact in my life, and really kind of reflect into those skills and pieces that are required to kind of move a needle per se, or even think more deeply about them.
Yeah, and the groups of people that, it's a massive global undertaking and a multidisciplinary enterprise. And the people who are taking on the work of implementing the SDGs are across the board. They're practitioners, they're activists, advocates, citizens. It's everyone. And identifying these sort of common skills and tools that we can all draw upon in our work, whatever form that may take, is so important in translating these sort of lofty, high-level goals into the component pieces that are required for execution and moving the needle.
In my efforts to show the individuals, the persons also that I'm talking with, I have a question always about music as well, because music is really close to my heart. If I asked the two of you to come up with a piece of music or a song that best embodies who you are, who Sydney is, who Shaurya is, which piece of music or song would that be? Who would like to go first?
Sydney, why don't you go for it?
Okay, I'll go ahead. This is a funny question. Let's see. I mean, there's lots of pieces of music that I love, but in terms of something that resonates with me, I would have to say "Go Your Own Way" by Fleetwood Mac. I know I think it's a breakup song, but that's not what it means to me. I mean, it's all about living life according to your own values and sort of traveling the path that's right for you and being in control of your own life, because at the end of the day, we're accountable to ourselves, and you have to sort of recognize the power that each of us has over steering our own life rather than just letting it happen to us. And whether that means, in the case of Fleetwood Mac, breaking up with Stevie Nicks, or for me personally, pursuing a career that I find meaningful and rewarding, I think that kind of encapsulates that feeling. And Shaurya and I mean, we're a startup, and that means taking on some risk and being comfortable living in that risk and living with the responsibility of knowing that your success and the success of your company is completely up to you. I mean, we're driving this car, or we're driving this train, I guess I should say, and we're building this thing from the ground up and doing it our own way.
Great.
That's a good one. I would say, I mean, that's really nice. I do agree. There's a lot of uncertainty, and you really do have to kind of pick this path out of choice. Like, it's not something that you can just jump into and, hey, let me give it a try. It really has to be something more conscious and driven. And if the song got you here, then we're glad you found Fleetwood Mac too. I would say I think an easier sort of classic one would, for me, that definitely is the top ones for me, would be the classic sort of "Don't Worry, Be Happy" song, Bobby McFerrin. It's obviously got a lot of renditions over time, but I think it's really interesting because it is something that's very core to what we do. I think being optimistic, or being an optimist, is one of the inherent attributes, almost part of a job description of founding a company or starting something on your own, right? I think you're to do something innovative, to do something new, you have to be going against the grain or doing something other people haven't. Whether it's a sort of a lonelier, uncharted territory, whether it's more sort of going against the norm and having to fight obstacles on your way. Either way, having sort of that faith, having that belief in what you're doing, and taking the small wins and then exaggerating those, not letting the bad times sort of pull you away, and kind of using all of that to really fuel persistence and fuel your sort of journey around it, I think is very key. And I think the song is obviously a fun song. It's an easy, there's not too much depth to it, but it is really interesting for how he talks about the ideas of kind of taking control of your emotions. I think is another really good exercise. Like, that's something that I think is one of the hardest almost skills that we can hone in on as individuals, right? Being able to not let outside things that are outside of your control affect you to a level where it changes your internal chemistry, internal thinking, internal reactions. It's very easy to react. Something bad happens to you, you react to it very instantly. That's just how we're wired. But being able to really take that, don't worry, be happy, more and more sort of as a mantra of the idea of worry when you really have to worry, and then channel that worrying into something that is constructive. But generally speaking, don't worry, be happy, right? Whatever the troubles are, it'll pass, like in sort of a higher realm. But kind of being in a place where you are able to, kind of go at a higher level. Like, you'll run into obstacles, you're biking down a path, you're going to have, pebbles on the road, it'll knock you off, you'll have speed bumps that you have to go through, but then kind of elevating yourself onto a bird's eye level, and you're able to see, I'm still excited about this bike journey, even with these pebbles and rocks and puddles and stuff on the way. I'm still excited about, where I'm going, the road that I'm on, the path that I'm on, what I'm doing, and being able to almost be content at that level, where the smaller things kind of just don't really hit you harder than just, little dots or smears on your windscreen, and you kind of swat them away. I think it's a lot more powerful, a lot harder to do than to say. It's easier to just keep listening to the song and letting it reinforce it into your mind, but to actually practice it is a lot trickier, for sure, especially in our space. Like Sydney mentioned, so much happening and so much uncertainty. I think is a very crucial aspect of maintaining a little bit of that sanity and making sure we keep some of the positivity in whatever we end up doing.
No, thanks for that. And I normally try to focus on the listen part of the podcast, walk, talk, listen, but I would like to make a comment on this one. And that is, I think it's, for me, what the first goal of the inner development goals is about the being, right? The work, the hard work that you need to do on yourself. And I think that's also something that you can have control over, at least most control over, what happens to you and who you are and how you react. And that's difficult enough as it is. I still have a question about the worry, though. I hear what you're saying. I don't worry, but is there anything that you worry about at the moment? And if so, what is that? So, and I would like to do a quick, because our time goes fast, a quick answer.
I mean, there's always things that you're worried about. I think as long as you're happy, it's not an issue. But yeah, I think for us, we're more immediately. I think I'm a little bit worried again that maybe this sustainability focus or attention that we're getting, the interest that we're getting, might be just another fad. I think we're a lot of people coming from the space are almost at a point where we're really fed up with the idea of let's actually do something. Let's put some execution behind these ideas, behind these let's operate something and execute on this. I think that's something that we're definitely continuously worried about, the interest, but how does it actually translate into action? And then that's something that we're happy to be a part of that conversation, and happy to make it easier to take action, and happy to keep building innovative solutions to do this. But at a higher level, it's really something that we as people need to kind of, like you mentioned, kind of take it inner, make it a deeper part of our cause, part of our purpose, part of our sort of meaning, and not be forced into it. I think the whole idea of everybody being like, oh, it's about time that we cared about this. It's beyond time that we had to do something to fix this, and climate change and sort of the energy crisis that we're going to go through. Like, it's less so about being forced to it, but more so, it is something that we would need to really dig in and find ourselves. And that's something that I do constantly worry about, of like, how are we actually going to be able to pull this off? Like, are we actually going to be able to create that impact and drive that sort of change and resonate that sort of messaging across folks, or is this going to be another wave and then we have to kind of pick it up again later?
Sydney, so where do you still see hope? Where do you guys still see hope then?
I think that I see hope in younger people. I mean, again, like Shaurya, I worry, and I think a lot of people my age, we worry about climate change more than anything. And I just had a child 6 months ago, and it's had me thinking a lot more about the future and sort of what the world is going to look like for young people today. And, when they're 20, 30 years old, what the planet's going to look like. And I also worry about sort of divisions in our society and how we're becoming very, very polarized and finding difficulty coming around things that should be, common causes that are sort of science-based and are truths, and we can't decide what is true and what's not true. But then I see young people sort of taking on this work and advocacy and really sort of stepping into different forms of identity and values than their parents did. And I find that very encouraging and comforting, and it gives me a lot of hope for the future. I see young people getting involved in politics and young people taking advantage of their platforms for issues that are bigger than themselves. And I don't think that I saw that so much among young people when I was that age. And I really think that, with all of the sort of pieces of technology that are at the fingertips of young people today, all of the knowledge and the ways that we have of disseminating it, there's really an unfounded opportunity to come together to make an impact, especially, when it comes to things like climate change. And I find that really encouraging.
Any last message or question or suggestion for the listeners from you?
I would say, I think this has been really nice. I think it's very important for us to have more conversations like this as well, to get folks to not just share more, be aware more, but really to just make them think more about this. And like you said, even the inner development goals, it is something that we do need to at some point internalize, like whoever we are and whatever we are, and regardless of what the decision ends up being, you do need to take it, process it, internalize it, and then convince yourself to say that, okay, I really don't care about this, or maybe I do care about this, and what parts of this do I care about, right? And if And I would say from sort of an invitation or sort of a suggestion, if do that internalization, I think folks should do that more, should read at least a little bit, at least at the surface, to get some, information about what's happening, what's important. Maybe I think the hardest piece is to see what of this is tangible enough that affects me on a day-to-day basis, because this is so, kind of thinking much more in the future. But I think if you do think about it, reflect, and feel like, you're passionate about the environment or passionate about doing your bit, every little bit, kind of every job counts. But if you're passionate about that, then really think about how you can sort of make more, sustainability conscious sort of decisions almost on a day-to-day basis, or make it as part of your lifestyle, right? Like we talked about, I think it's a lot more about making it part of the culture, making it part of your lifestyle, and less so just sort of something that needs to be done. And specifically, I mean, in the realm of commuting, if that comes up for you and it's something that you care about and you're not able to figure it out, that a lot of people do have, I just feel like that the only option for me is driving, or that's the only thing I can do, or this is my only option. Then you need help, reach out to us, ask your managers, your HR, your boss, CEO, whoever needs to hear this, to tell them that you care about this and you want to potentially do something about your commute to work, but you're not sure what to do. And, they should definitely go check us out as well. Find Fleet and see if there's something we can do. We'll definitely find some way that we can help you. But I think it's more so about getting people to just start thinking more about it and sort of starting to realize how that matters for themselves personally.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will make sure that, all the links and your, social media handles, etc., will be available.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the podcast notes. Sydney, any last words from you?
I think that Shaurya sort of hit the nail on the head there, but I would encourage everyone to sort of look around them and see the ways that climate change is affecting us on a daily basis. More extreme weather events, or flooding in your neighborhood, is whatever is going on. And just think about it. This is not some looming problem that we have to deal with in the future. It's here right now, and our decisions today matter.
Right. I would like to thank you both for today. It was really informative for me. And second, what is, I'm sure the listeners feel and have, heard that as well, is it will be fun to work for you guys, because you are really a team, so that you feel that. So that's great. So I would like to wish you all the best with everything you do. Make sure that people can find you if they, would like to start collaborating with you. And we wish you all the best.
Thank you so much. This was fun.
Thank you. Yeah, likewise.
Thank you for listening to Walk, Talk, Listen. Please check us out on 100mile.org or follow us on Facebook or Instagram.